Eboti was a 16th century woman living in Central Africa who began experimenting with voodoo after falling into a deep and passionate hatred for a woman who had recently moved into the same village. Eboti hated her for absolutely no reason other than the woman being beautiful and attracting attention accordingly. Eboti quietly burned with rage as the woman attracted men who Eboti had never even been interested in. Eboti tirelessly used needles to mutilate a voodoo doll that represented the woman. Eboti wished with all of her heart that the woman would be mutilated as Eboti did to the doll. It wasn't working. Eboti's efforts had no effect, which made Eboti sick with frustration. She stopped eating. She read voodoo book after book and modified her techniques obsessively. Nothing worked. One night, Eboti took hallucinogenic drugs to take her voodoo study to a new level. In her vision, she encountered an extra-dimensional entity who was attracted to such intense hatred. It was an entity normally uninterested in creatures from Earth, but the hatred that Eboti felt was pungent enough to summon it for a glance. Eboti begged the entity for help. She had no other curiosities to ask of the entity, except how to mutilate the woman in her village. The entity was intrigued and impressed at how a human being could desire evil so strongly for a neighbor over essentially no reason. It decided that Eboti deserved its assistance. When Eboti awoke from her vision, she immediately began writing the instructions she received before she would forget them. She spent the whole day furiously writing. Before the next nightfall, she had her book, and she knew in her heart that it would work. She shrieked in eagerness and ran out into the darkness to collect the necessary components for her spell. She gathered what she could on her own. She paid with her last coin for other parts. When she had no more money, she sold her body in exchange for animal bones and dried plants that she needed. Eboti returned home with everything required for the spell. She had nothing to eat for 3 days, but that hadn't even crossed her mind. She used white paint to make the geometric shapes on her dirt floor. She boiled a brew in a pot placed at the center of the shapes. She placed the voodoo doll that she had been using before into the brew. She allowed the brew to cool on its own. She drank the brew. She spoke the words that the entity instructed her to in a language unheard of. She pulled the doll out of the pot. She snarled with evil as she plunged needle after needle into the face of the doll. She roared with laughter as her bloody hands drove needles that tore the doll to shreds. Eboti didn't stop until the doll was totally destroyed. Did it work? She had to know immediately. It was dark again. Eboti ran outside to the woman's house. As she approached, she heard screaming inside the woman's house. But something was not as Eboti planned. People were screaming in every house. Eboti mutilated every member in her village. Eboti stopped in the middle of the street. She didn't know what to do. She ran back home. Would the villagers know she had done this? Of course they would. She spent the whole previous night going door to door for strange things. Eboti needed help. She took the same hallucinogenic drugs that led to the encounter with the entity. In her altered state of mind, she called out to the entity. She yelled and screamed as loud as she could. She tore her hair out in desperation to make contact with the entity. It did not appear to her. As the drug wore off, Eboti was frightened with a loud crash as someone kicked her door in. Villagers poured into her house to see the painted shapes on her floor and a savagely ravaged voodoo doll pinned to the wall. It was obvious that she was responsible for mutilating the town. The villagers beat her severely and then burned her house down with her inside. Eboti awoke as an extra-dimensional entity enslaved to the one who met her. If you fall asleep with a passionate and irrational hatred for another individual, you might encounter Eboti in a dream. Eboti will see you as the woman in her village who she hated fiercely. She will drive needles into your soul as you are frozen from escape. She will place needles that will correspond to different organs of your physical body. Your soul will return to the physical realm with the invisible needles still connected. Every time you sleep, your soul will bring the aroma of suffering to Eboti in your organs' unique flavors. Eboti will capture your suffering like a bottle of wine and deliver it to her master. Each time you return to the physical realm, you return with less and less of your soul. Eventually, your body will manifest disease in your organs where Eboti has placed her needles. Finally, your physical body will die and remnants of your tortured soul will pass to the next dimension, where you will regain full awareness of what has happened to you. There, in that dimension, you will have the opportunity to confront Eboti for what she has done to you. But by then, what remains of you will be no threat to her.